Martin Ericsson are going to talk about their practice today on designing live role-playing games. They are both designers of live role-playing games. Cecilia is, they both have day jobs because this doesn't really pay the rent. But that doesn't mean that they're not like really expert and professional in what they do. Cecilia works in marketing and manages social media. That's her day job. While Martin works at, right now, is senior content developer for CCP, for the World of Darkness upcoming MMO. When they are not working on their day jobs, they are actually working on using LARPs as a way to complement other activities. The idea of using LARPs as part of a transmedia storytelling practice. We have here too, by the way, Martin has 2 nominations and 1 win in the Emmys for transmedia content development. Cecilia also has 1 nomination at the Emmys. I don't think that we have a lot of game designers that can boast that. Yeah, they've been basically working on this for a long time, and it's going to be like a really cool insight on the bolts and crannies of the designing of role-playing games. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything else. Did I cover? Okay, there's 2 things. If you tweet about this talk, Cecilia asked me to use the hashtag Celestra LARP. Celestra LARP. Well, if you think that game design can be complicated, just imagine what it is to make a LARP for the Battlestar Galactica franchise in a real Cold War destroyer in a harbor in Gothenburg. So, without further ado, please give them a round of applause.
Imagine you're standing in the cold bowels of said warship in Gothenburg. Around you are about 40 people you met like 5 hours ago. They're decked out in strange Soviet-looking khaki uniforms. In a few minutes, you're about to transform yourself into the crew of the Monitor Celestra, a civilian vessel dragged into the climactic battle against humanity's children, the Cylons. You're a bit nervous. You had no idea what to expect or how to even play this. Am I supposed to become a child now? What's going on? Then suddenly the lights dim, the blue lights go on, and Admiral Adama's voice booms from the intercom system. The game has begun. For the first hour, you're a bit awkward trying to find your place. But as Marines from Battlestar Galactica storm your civilian vessel, you find yourself stepping up at gunpoint and crying out, "This is a civilian vessel. We will not bow down to your military authority." As your crewmates stand up one after another beside you, you realize that you have stopped acting and started being.
They are not considered an immediate threat, and they are preparing a delegation to come on board the Celestra to discuss what they call our common future. As one of the Virgis executives has been vetted out in the airlock.
And the Colonial Marines are only here to supervise and support the Celestra crew in running the ship.
So from this moment I declare martial law by the power invested in me by the military and the civil law.
Look, you're not taking away the power from my people. Look.
There's power to stop the attempt to do a blind jump that will cut power and everything else as well.
We have jumped successfully, people.
Just take it easy. Just take it easy. Okay? I want to go up there
And do it.
but I need help. Okay?
Do it. You take him, Marie. You take him to Virgin.
Take him there, but just explain to me first. What are our options here?
Our options are we need to take down the AI before it infiltrates all
Okay.
systems.
If you get me up there, I can fix this. Okay?
So, what you now have witnessed is nothing of any actors. All the people who were there were actually players. And we had a crew of 2 people who played a reporter team at the LARP. We had the amazing possibility to show this movie to some of the true actors of the new series. When Edward James almost looked at this video, he was like, this is truly Battlestar Galactica. How the hell did you do this? And then he turned out to his assistant, and he needed to show her too. And then he turned out to show it to one of his other assistants, because he just wanted a little bit more minute to talk to us about his love for Galactica, and asked, are you doing this in the US? Can I come? So we are here now talking about the production that we did, and we want to bring her home.
So, the Monitor Celestra was an insane production in Sweden, trying to unite fandom and live-action role-playing.
And cosplay.
And cosplay. And what I want to start with is to give you a little theoretical model that I find useful when thinking about the difference between different forms of culture that are all, I think, encompassed by this conference. So I want to use an analysis model by a group called Interacting Arts from their book Participatory Culture, which will be released in English shortly. And the central question that this theory asks itself is the almost Marxist question of who controls the production of cultural stimuli. So first, we need to define what is a cultural stimuli. Any unit that affects you, the image of a kiss, the smell of lavender when you enter a shop, which is a part of their display setup. The beat of a dance floor. All of these things are cultural stimuli that affect us and provoke emotion. But who structures them and how? That is what this model asks. We perceive culture to be sort of like this. A single author produces a work, and you sit down and listen. It doesn't matter whether it's a book, a linear song, a linear movie. The audience agreement is always the same. That you have a linear series of stimuli that is produced and created by the great author. The second form, the second type of culture we can talk about is seen as a great revolution, and is what we mainly have been talking about here during these days, and that is interactive culture. But if we look at the production of the cultural stimuli that the players in this case are subjected to, they are all predetermined. Even if they are smart algorithms and so on, the author has still created them. And they are, and of course they create an illusion of agency or even actual agency. But the point is that all of the stimuli are pre-recorded. Every soundbite, every graphics piece has been authored, even if it's emergent. The third form, which I think is often overlooked and most times never seen even as culture at all, is participatory culture. So in a situation where people create the cultural stimuli for each other, when there is no grand author that projects his vision down on you, the examples could include of course, tabletop role-playing, which is co-created storytelling. But you could also say that a BDSM party is a good example of co-created stimuli. Very concrete stimuli in this case, often. But I think the most clear-cut case of participatory culture is probably live-action role-playing. Live-action role-playing is a beautiful Gesamtkunstwerk form, which can include any other kind of humanism, but it does have an image problem. I think the video clip Lightning Bolt has probably done more damage to the perception of live-action role-playing globally than anything else on the planet. The potential for the live-action role-playing is very, very different. What I think, when we started doing the Monitor Celestra, we were afraid that a lot of the people that we wanted to reach, fans of the show and so on, would sort of stumble on the fact that we called it a live-action role-playing game because we're proud of our heritage and where we come from. But it turned out that the combination of staying true to an established franchise, in this case Battlestar Galactica, and playing it in such a spectacular location as a real Cold War destroyer built in the 70s and operational up into the 90s, were sufficient enough for a lot of people to overcome their prejudices and turn up. So we had a lot of first-time players entering this game, which is beautiful because of one of our intentions. If we look at a very rough and reduced sort of image of different LARP cultures, we could, this is just one scale, but on this scale, we would traditionally place most American LARPs in more game-structured and rules-heavy systems, whereas the Nordic LARPs often veer towards interactive theater or just complete emergent expression in the group. I would place sort of the Monitor Celestra somewhere there, because this is a conscious effort to use a lot of what we find are some of the beautiful things about rules-bound systems in American LARPs, and some of the extreme immersion found in Nordic LARPs. So traditionally, you would think about a live-action game as either probably fantasy, or a Star Trek game, or possibly a Call of Cthulhu-based horror game. This has not really been the case for the last 10 years in the Nordic countries. I just want to give some quick flashes of games that I love and respect, and who has given a lot of inspiration to the design of the Monitor Celestra. So beginning with what we could see as mainstream Nordic LARP. If you see the Crossbow Company up there, that's from a long-running war campaign called Warrior's Heart. Even though this is a full-on buffer LARP, it's 24/7 immersive. Everybody plays their characters all the time. And the two different powers here are not orcs versus humans, but it's a socialist dictatorship versus a multinational capitalist libertarian corporation in some sort of steampunky fantasy world. So even the mainstream games have a certain amount of ideology, which also goes for Carolus Rex, which is sort of the precursor to the Monitor Celestra. I ran it in, goddamn, it was 98, in a Soviet submarine. And that's a game about hyper-nationalism and a fully militarized Swedish society. The development of the art house scene has been very strong and fast during the last few years. You could mention cases like A Quiet Evening with the Family, which is based on Thomas Vinterberg's movie The Celebration. So it's about the collapse of the bourgeoisie family. A family secret comes out at the 50 years celebration, and all the cards just fall. The polite veneer of bourgeoisie society is collapsed, and revealing the monsters and horrible repressive mechanics underneath. Europa was a game that has been suggested that loads of politicians should play. It's about the way that we treat immigrants in the Nordic countries, where we have halfway houses, where we let people from sometimes warring countries stay in the same sort of indoctrination camp, where they are supposed to learn about Swedish culture and so on, but the effect is often quite the opposite. They get polarized against society, and it's a very, very poor method for integration. And in this one, we pretended that the Nordic countries had ended up in a similar situation to Yugoslavia with civil war. And we played refugees from Nordic countries seeking refuge in the Balkans. So all the reception players spoke Russian, because we used Russian LARPers for that. And a really, really interesting game to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, which is often a lot of the point with these games. No Man's Land is a part of Cecilia's series of sort of hyper-realistic post-apocalyptic games, very much.
And yes, we used an actual airplane.
Yeah, there was the airstrike from a Cessna that came in, and everybody was like, "What is that plane coming over?" Ignore. And then the bomb started going off. Like, fuck! And we realized this.
And we were only 7 of us in the production team who actually known about this, because we thought if the other players would know about this, they were like, "No, you can't use a plane for a LARP." Well, now you know that you can.
Yeah, every single piece of human expression can be used in LARP, including piloting. So yeah, beautiful games about a shortly after the collapse of society and the appeal of fascism and going into militarized structures in times of crisis. Beautiful games. And something that is very, very close to home is probably my favorite game from the last 3 years. It's called Just a Little Loving. And it's set in New York, even though it was played in Norway. And it takes place in a circle of friends around a gay marketing guru. And it's 3 4th of July parties, 1981, 82, and 83. So it's a beautiful game about desire, friendship, and loss. I have never seen so many grown people cry in any cultural situation as after that game. I asked a friend of mine who was a dancer in Madonna's dance company in the 80s in New York to attend the second version of this play, because I was a bit concerned that we're playing with things that is very close to home to people. And I was nervous about his reaction, but he just called me up crying and saying this was the most beautiful memorial that anybody has done about those years and for his friends. So yeah. And finally, LARP is popping up in strange places over the world. For instance, in the occupied territories in Palestine. Till Death Do Us Part is a story about the marriage between a Palestinian woman and a Norwegian man, and the clash of cultures between Middle Eastern culture and European culture, played in Ramallah on the actual West Bank, which now has a big edu LARP scene and a growing kids LARP scene.
A lot of my friends in my storytelling society back home are actually going there. We have a big project following up next year in Ramallah, and it's really amazing to see how we actually can use these kind of immersive games and teach.
So yeah, that's just a snapshot of what's going on in the Nordic countries. And Lizzie Stark took out some sort of commonalities between all this, because there's a long range between Warrior's Heart and Till Death Do Us Part. They are completely different. They do share some commonalities. All of them, of course, are participatory in the way that we defined that in the earlier aesthetic model. They are highly physical. They are what you see is what you get, which means that often they don't rely on indexical propping, but actual propping. And that sort of the goal of that is to make them as immersive as is humanly doable. They're often rules light, and when there are rules, they are dramatic systems that are aimed to illustrate sort of the ideological points of the game, or ask questions, or make or just direct the dramatic structure, rather than simulation systems for conflict resolution, which seems to be the norm in a lot of American LARPing. They are often socially conscious. They often ask questions. They don't pretend to have answers, but just put up a question there, let people play with it, and see what they can take away from it. Often in sharp contrast with what you see is what you get in physicality, some techniques from improvisation theater and black box theater are often used to portray events that are outside the scope of the physical or the physical stage. So if you want to play out the first time you met your wife, who you're now divorcing in the current timeline, you could go to a black box, play out a flashback like that, and then re-enter into the physical reality to give deeper collective building of backstories. And yes, there is a strong division between sort of the art house style that is using often set in modern times with very modern issues, and the mainstream styles, which the biggest ones are and will probably remain the fantasy games. Beautifully propped fantasy games are the mainstay of European LARPing, especially German LARPing, where you have massive events like Conquest of Mythoria with 6,000 players in beautiful costumes. So while we're going through the case study of Celestra, I want to show a little bit of how we create an exploratory framework for the players to exist in, because I think that's one way of looking at LARP design. And the players are really what drives the LARP. There cannot be a LARP auteur who controls everything and whose vision is the one that the players consume. That is simply not realistic. And when people attempt to do it, it's often destructive for the game design. The theater theoretician and the practitioner Richard Schechner from New York, he's in NYU now. Super. He, in his book Environmental Theater, he talks about his experiences with Dionysus in '69, which is his version of the Bacchante, which is played here. And he allowed the audience a large degree of participation. They were given the roles as the celebrants in the rituals that are dead center of the plot of the Bacchante. But after the audience took one of his main actors and dragged him out into Times Square to save him from the sacrifice. And of course the whole plot collapsed. In Environmental Theater he writes, "I have stopped being an artist and I have become the prostitute of the audience." Words to that effect. And I think that's the moment when, because his work beautifully applies to live action role-playing design theory, just like Jerzy Grotowski's work can be super inspirational, or Victor Turner's cultural anthropology can be integrated into design practice. I mean, in the same way, he was almost there. I mean, the LARP almost came to fruition in the 1960s right here in New York. But he stumbled on the auteur block at that point. You can tell him that we find that to be a bit funny. But so you absolutely cannot create a game without players and giving basically all the power to your players. You can create frameworks, you can motivate them, but you gotta let them go, man. That's the only way. So let's talk a little bit about the first framework, which is the question, what is this game about? So we chose a well-known franchise framework for the very simple reason that it's useless to write a new sci-fi world and write thousands of pages of background or history and so on that players have to relearn. Personally, I think that the focus of a LARP designer should be in the event and what you want to express with that event. You're not Tolkien. You're not going to pull out your own old novel, the fantasy novel that you're working on in your teens and make that into a beautiful fantasy world, because it is not the same thing. And that is one of the reasons by choosing a almost cliched world, because it is very easy for players to know how interactions work within a world like Battlestar Galactica or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. So we made a little adaptation strategy. We said we can't be limited purely by canon, because players need to be able to diverge for that, or they're going to feel really, really closed in. But we're going to be canon until it's not. And it broke very surprisingly a few times. Originally, I wanted to do it sort of super cosplay style, with having Adama and Starbuck and so on played by players.
He was the only one in the production team who wanted to do that.
But I also wanted to do it American style, and so let's look at cosplay and what do they like. But nah. So we made the very classic Nordic LARP decision of saying, okay, let's put it on a ship that hasn't been fully explored in the series, in a new situation with new characters, and most importantly, a new main allegory. Because when you think about it, Battlestar Galactica came out in a very sensitive time, and it basically addresses issues of post 9/11 America in a way that nobody could do that soon after the attacks, really. So we asked ourselves, what is the most burning question in Europe right now? And in the faithful words of the scrolls, all this has happened before, and all this will happen again. Right now, organized fascism and anti-immigration is rampant over Europe. The image from the above is from the Golden Dawn, which is a Greek fascist party, which is gaining terrifying strength at the moment. Same thing is happening in Sweden with between 10 and 12% voting for anti-immigration parties. So this was the fuel. We wanted to do a game about cultural intolerance and about what happens when you blame the weakest in a moment of crisis. And to do this, we took the cultures from the spin-off show Caprica, the Taurons and the Capricans. And when you look at them, they are sort of, they represent two very different ways of living. One is collective, family-oriented, honor-oriented, and can be seen as sort of the majority world. Whereas the other is individualistic, hyper-career-focused, egotistical, but also open, and very Western and American. So that's the second question. What cultures are we using to illustrate our first primary question? Our first,
One of the fine things with going to Galacticon, we were there in May this year, was when we talked to James Olmos, and we actually explained all this to him, because the cast was in the United Nations a couple of years ago and just discussing about 9/11. And we were sitting around 15 minutes just discussing the cultures and what happened. And he was like, yeah, you really need to tell true stories with both TV shows, movies, and this. I want to be in this. So.
Yeah, fortunately, he stole his admiral's uniform after the shows. He's got it in the cupboard somewhere. But yes, the next question after the cultures and how to illustrate the main theme with them would be, what is the current situation we're setting the game in? Because it's completely beside the point the thousands of years that has happened before the start of the game. So we wanted this to be about cultural conflict, so we chose a Tauron vessel. This ship is shown in the TV series a lot of times. We see it in the original series. There's an episode called Take the Celestra, which is about a uprising on this ship. So we turned it into a scouting ship, a monitor ship owned by a private corporation, Tauron owned. And at the beginning of the attacks against the 12 colonies, the Celestra rescues important politicians from Tauron, its place of origin. But as it joins Roslin's fleet in a desperate attempt to escape the Cylons, humanity's artificially intelligent children who have judged humanity, found them wanting, and is now exterminating them. When they join up with Roslin's fleet and the Battlestar Galactica, they arrive at Ragnar Anchorage. This happens at the end of the pilot episode. We chose to put the game there for a very simple reason. We didn't want to require people to watch all the show. It's enough just to watch the pilot, and it's a perfect place because the stakes are massive. The 12 colonies have been destroyed. Your home is gone. You're in mourning. You're in a position where anything can happen. What happens at the Battle of Ragnar Anchorage is that the fleet tries to make a jump while being blocked by the Cylon fleet. So confrontation is inevitable. The Monitor Celestra in our story is an old colonial warship that has now been turned into a civilian vessel. So the order comes down from the Battlestar Galactica to remilitarize this ship and put itself on the front line of the battle, which the captain of the ship refuses because they're a civilian ship, they're a Tauron ship, and they will not bow down to the colonial authority. So they disobey orders and jump before the Galactica and the rest of the fleet does. You can actually see this in the CGI of the first episode, sort of. So, and as a penalty for this disobedience, Galactica puts a skeleton crew on board the ship, a skeleton crew of conscripted military and career military that want to change this from a civilian vessel to a Caprica-controlled military vessel. And 2 jumps later, they are alone. They're in a different sector. They're separated from the fleet. What happened? Is this a Tauron plot to gain independence from the colonial fleet? Have Cylons infiltrated the ship? Where do we go now? All of this is now in the hands of the players, and they have the freedom to steer the ship through the use of our simulation systems wherever they want. And the power struggle for control over the Monitor Celestra has begun. So that's the situation we enter the game. And the next level beyond situation is looking at the individual players. Who will the players be? We started by the writing process really started coming up with a high-level snapshots of what different crews or group do we want, what do we want them to represent in the as reflected by the central question, what are their position on the cultural conflict, how do they add to the cultural conflict. So beginning with crews, which are the two different crews, the Galactica crew and the Celestra crew. We go down to groups, which could be things like faster than light engineers, and the subgroups, which could be like shift one of the faster than light engineers, and vertical groups, which could be the hyper-religious. They can be found in any one of these groups, or the Halatha, which is the Tauron Mafia. They can be found in any group. So that's the basic structure, how we structure character work. Then we brought in some contact suggestions. Like these are some other characters that you might know, and it was up to the players to then forge those relationships either beforehand or on location and in the preparation work. We had suggestions for character arcs, like this character is basically a sociopath. He could either bloom, completely bloom out and become a crawling assassin in the flip out and become a crawling assassin trying to murder Taurons, or he could use his he could concentrate on just fighting the Cylons or becoming trying to work with an honor code and become a warrior instead of a murderer. But these are only suggestions. Players can do whatever they want with them. And add to this that every single character belongs to a costume group, and we're running this game 4 times, and people have very different height and length and
We
weight.
called it pay and play.
Yeah.
Suddenly in the production team we call it pay and pray. Because we realized I used with my team over 5,000 post-it notes just to doing the casting process. Because we had 145 different costumes divided into different groups, and you have 3 types of tickets. And when you paid for the LARP, you paid for what type of costume, not the type of character and what you were getting at the LARP. So it was a lot of hours. I think it was 25 hours for each LARP, just doing the casting process and putting the bags together with all the costumes. Normally on a Nordic LARP, you are doing your own costume, but we wanted to provide the costumes because we want to have this feeling of unity, and of course from the franchise too. So when you have a guy like this with so intense visions of what he wants to do, sometimes reality just bites you in the ass.
Yeah, for instance, I want people to sleep on the ship 24/7. They will never break character. It's going to be in there all the time.
Oh,
and
no,
they're going to eat there.
no,
They're going to smoke.
security,
They're going to smoke. There's a lot of smoking in the show.
Fire regulations, insurance regulations. Come on, please. We need to do something else.
Yeah, like what? How can you do this? You're spoiling the entire game.
Yeah, I know what we can do. We put it in 4 episodes, which feels like more of a TV show.
That's actually a good idea.
Yeah, I know. I'm good at compromising, huh? So what we did was producing a mad weekend. It's a full service weekend. You arrive at Friday morning and you're leaving on Sunday, or you're going to an after party, leaving on Monday with a little bit of a hangover. But up there you see actually the fire crew. The fire crew was one of these compromises we needed to do. Because when I was there and talking to the museum about renting the destroyer, we realized that they only had regulations for having 30, 40 people on board, because it's a museum right now. And I had a meeting with the fire department, leaving them 15 pages of ideas on how to do fire regulations, fire drills, and it was yeah, one more thing, can you do a security movie? So we did a security movie. We were standing like a flight crew, just trying to point out all the exits. You can find that one on YouTube, actually. So what we did was distributing costumes, props, waivers, cleaning all the boats. We're doing the fire drills with in-game food, and we did this all in 4 episodes. 1 on Friday night, 2 Saturday, 1 Sunday morning. Also, the hotel, breakfast, meals included, and also at the hostel that we used, we tried to see that the groups were actually sleeping together. So between the episodes, they could ask, hey, guy, that scene we did 2 hours ago, can we intense that? Because I want to really play that I don't like you anymore.
Yeah, it works fine. I think my character will hate your guts as well, especially if I see that fucking Halatha tattoo and I realize you belong to the mob. Can I discover that between the episodes?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Yes.
Oh, let's do that.
Yeah, let's play on that. So, what we did with Construction de Celestra, that we actually used the current museum map, twist it in the other way, and put it inside of the Celestra model. So what you see, these kind of rooms, is actually the rooms at the museum. And we actually closed some of the rooms, so it was like you couldn't go in a circle. You need to go up and between the different groups, because we planned out the different groups around the vessel.
Yeah, and also I had this idea that we would have a central corridor that's possible to block off because of the dynamics of a power struggle that can be. So it can be face-offs between different groups of Marines and so on in that corridor, which is an awesome corridor.
And the awesome corridor, we also had the
like
radio alarms with the green lights turning on when we had a radio leak. So.
Yeah, so if it became too congested, we could just, there's a radiac leak in the central corridor, flush everybody out. Very, very convenient.
Yeah, and we had need to do some more framework too. Also, we had these safety first posters we needed to place out and replace the museum's posts. And of course, we wanted to have Cylon, not just the human Cylons, because that was too easy to do. And also, we needed to know who am I playing with? What's their in-game character name? So
because you won't have time to learn all of your co-players' in-character names. That's simply not possible. Then it's such a huge crew.
And also, we needed to know how many people are on the vessel right now, because we only had 150 people that can be on the vessel, including the crew. So we had both name and number on tags.
Yeah, the costumes, I would say, the BC costumes, easy. We just bought them from cosplay places, and the mechanics we designed ourselves because nothing good. For Celestra, we basically were reinventing the look of the Colonial Warriors from first season, and Virgis lab suit and that type of thing. And civilians, of course, were the category which was cheapest because we didn't have to provide costumes. We just provided guidelines for how to dress. So really quickly, these are just some duty blues and mechanics. The Celestra, I'm really happy about the way they came out, especially when people started adding scarves and sort of more Middle Eastern looking gear. It's pretty neat. And of course, like conveying, this is a research ship. So the Virgis employees, we just decked them out in basic lab gear. And so on. Yeah, and that's we need to pick up the pace a little bit here. So just talking quickly about how we developed the dramatic systems framework. And saying rules here is like it's in the widest sense of the term. So we used, as I said, a 4-episode structure. And we chose to have the basic, having an escalation of the rule system during the different acts. So in the first act, no gun fired at all. During the middle act, yes, sure, you could fire a gun. Confrontations could end up with that, but nobody would actually get killed. They would just get wounded. But in the last episode, like when a gun is drawn, somebody's gonna die.
And a lot of people actually died.
Yeah, a lot.
Because it's fun to die at the LARP, hey?
Yep. So, Battlestar Galactica is full of moments of guns being pointed at each other and they people shouting, "Step away from that console!"
What? I have a gun!
Yeah.
Oh, no, okay,
Drop the gun! Drop the gun!
I have a huge gun here!
Oh crap! Take the control key! Yeah.
So, what you need to do to have this standoff, you need to have an easy way to doing the system. So, first of all, a fist, and then we have a knife. So, a knife beats the fist, and then we have a gun that beats both of them, and of course, a bigger gun beats them all.
So, in a confrontation, you would the guns would come out one after one, and often they would be procreated dramatic scenes over maybe 5 to 10 minutes. They are storytelling scenes and they are dramatic scenes. They're not competitive scenes, but there is a factor of uncertainty because you never know who's going to come into the room and add their gun to one of the sides. So it escalates, and then the losing side has the privilege and the duty to disarm the situation, where the winning side has the privilege to decide what the win will be. So that was a fun mechanic. I was hoping for us to try it out here, but that's going to take like 10-15 minutes, and we're late on time. You cool with that? Sweet. So yes. Yeah. Do you want to go? Okay, sure. The color red was our next mechanic. Why? What the hell? Because of course we want to simulate how do we create these kinds of experiences. A major part of the show is Gaius Baltar's beautiful egocentric personality and the way that he communicates with his invisible girlfriend. Yeah. Fuck, I should actually end this talk. No, I should actually
They
end it
don't
all.
like you.
Yeah, I should fucking... Yeah,
They
everybody
think you're
hates
just
me.
the LARPing moron from the fracking Sweden, you know that? So just
See
shoot
right through
yourself,
me, the
sir.
fucking
Shoot
see right
there.
through. Yeah, you get the point.
So what we actually did that none of the players were allowed to wear the color red. So we used we call them the phantom players. So they were walking around, and of course the players know that this person actually hears what I'm saying, and he's talking to that girl over there, and I can hear what she's saying. Oh my God, something is going on, and how should I react to her or that? And people could play out to the phantoms like if they were gods, or if they were just insane, that they hear some voices in their mind. And a funny thing with using the phantoms, we have two friends that actually are twins. So people were really scared. And of course, they played one of the games, and they played on different parts of the ship as they were just regular players. And after the game, people was like, you were Cylons, or what? And a lot of players didn't realize that actually we had two twins at that game.
Yeah, another thing that happens a lot in the BSG and Caprica series is like flashbacks to earlier times, like before the war and so on. We deeply wanted that. So we used the black box technique, but we put it within the fiction by creating a holoband lab, which is of course their immersive VR systems. So people could go in and tell the people operating the equipment, I want to relive my last meeting with my mother. And then one of them would play the mother and play out a sort of psychodramatic scene, and then they could go back in the game.
And here we have a picture, an in-game picture actually.
It's a fairly typical day in the CIC.
And do you see something spectacular in this picture? Well, let's see what's there. We have a gun. And with a second gun, and now we have a bigger gun. There's the captain over there.
Yeah.
And Galactica.
What is that Galactica freak wanting to
And
do?
over in the background, someone is calling someone.
It's probably a silent attack that's being called in right now.
So that is, and when this intense scene happens, it's really good to have these easy, basic game structures, because then people just can act out because they know how to use stuff like cut. When a scene comes to intense, like if I go try to strangle this guy, and just trying, and
cut, fuck, that actually hurt.
Yeah,
okay,
okay, yeah.
Cool.
Shall I beat you instead, just or?
Not the first.
Okay, frack it all on me.
Okay, let's turn it around.
Okay.
You need to give me the water bottle now. It's the ricin. It's a poison.
But my life depends on it. I will die if I do that. I will really die if I do that.
Yeah, no, you give it to me right now. You fucking give it to me.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay,
So
that was terrible, Cecilia.
Yeah, I know. So what we're trying to explain here is just try to play to lose. It's more fun if you're losing the situation, because then the game can be more intense for the others actually watching the scenes.
So, but playing to lose applies to dramatic systems. And we were crazy enough that not only did we want to do a beautiful dramatic reenactment of Battlestar Galactica, but we wanted hardcore gameplay simulation systems as well. So we built a space simulator based on sort of Silent Hunter games with Dead Reckoning and real math and super complex navigation without computerized equipment. The displays, because we used a number of displays that I will show you later, they were basically feeding information in, but the decisions were made on these kinds of grid papers with rulers and so on, just like you see them doing in the CIC in the show. So our simulation system allowed for a literal internal power structure, because the reactor power could be distributed to different systems. There were, of course, different groups were using these different systems to control the ship in different ways. So at one point, the engineers and the people who control the actual heart became the kingmakers of the ship, because they managed to get so many people defending the core in a sort of union uprising that the workers they controlled the power of the system, which is beautiful, just like intended. We wanted this. We also wanted people to be able to explore different locations. So we had, beside the destroyer, there was actually a submarine that we used when people were boarding things like stations that they encountered in space. We wrote it sort of like a BioWare game, so there are 6 or 7 different locations with dramatic stuff. You can't see them all, but there's interesting stuff that continues the game and continues the central discourse no matter where you go, but they are very different. So there's actual agency, and this is crazy, and you should not really do this in LARP because it's so production intensive, and I mean there's a lot of content that people are not going to see, but we wanted to do that anyway.
And also you need a lot of stuff when you're doing this, so we needed a lot of tech stuff.
Just one thing, this system is a living system, so it continues being iterated upon. It's been used on a Warhammer 40k game most recently, a Rogue Trader adaptation. So it's constantly being revised, and it's designed by a PhD in game design called Carl Bergström. Super interesting guy, you should invite him to talk specifically about his simulation thinking. So the tech framework, what did we need to make this
So this is just a short list of what we actually used, and just to draw the network cables took like 48
because
hours.
Forget wireless, it's armored steel. No. Yeah. So yeah, this is sort of how it's all stuck together. CIC being, remember, CIC is analog, the other stuff is digital. This is how the consoles actually looked. So we used Arduino to do like hard switches and so on all the way through. So nothing is clicking on board and nothing is using mouse. All of it is hardcore interfaces. And of course it's game mastered by a crew behind the scenes sitting outside spawning Cylon ships and directed them, because we need the hands-on control for everything. Because we want to do, just like a game master in a tabletop game is able to improvise, we want to be able to do the same thing even within combat situations. So 24/7, 8 game masters on deck, who were also, at the moment notice, could dress up as, say, like a splinter group from the Tom Zarek socialists that they could find on an abandoned space station, or
and you're not safe even if you're a producer. Suddenly just came up to me, you need to go in and playing a pilot, but what?
Yeah, you need to have a silent abortion. Here's your fetus. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah.
But,
so
but it was fun.
And runtime game mastering, which this is very, very rare in live-action role-playing games. This is an anomaly. Why is this game a good case example? Basically because it's produced with the insane idea that more is more. So it just sort of includes,
but that does also includes
all our favorite shit from the Nordic LARP scenes. It sort of has everything. There's of course dangers in that as well, in doing the more is more approach, because it is absolutely not fashionable to do that. I mean, less is more is sort of the reasonable design practice for these games, because it will be super powerful if you concentrate only on high school bullying and a friend who commits suicide after you've been nasty to him. If you will have a massively enjoyable and emotional game, but with none of these hassles. So, I mean, there are some weird observations that are worth doing here. This is super rules-heavy game, I realized yesterday when I was talking about this as a rules-light game. Yes, the sheer amount of rules in the simulation system, it's just that it's not in the player's face. They don't have to learn the Nero manual of 100 pages for fighting orcs and stuff. The complexity is there, and the consistency is there. And sometimes we ask ourselves, is this consistency worth all this work? Because with the players, we could make shit up out our asses, but we abide to our system for some weird honesty reason. I think it's some sort of heritage from tabletop role-playing game that game masterhood should be fair, but it can't be. So yeah, we struggle with that as well. And yeah, of course, it's very different experiences, these kinds of emergent, chaotic, massive games with loads of different factors, which will create an unpredictable narrative instead of a collective flow that is more common. And yeah, it's messy, and sometimes players will be so excited by events that we spawn, they will forget to eat, they will constantly chat. That's that seems to be unabated wherever. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about how we sort of launched it and how we worked with
of course
giving information to players.
We also need an online framework, so we decided to just post a web page, and on that web page you can find the briefing.
Basically all the material you need to play except your character, which is...
Also we used a lot of YouTube. Every Friday we did something we called Friday Feature. We did a video blog there and just trying to tell where we are in the stage of this production. Of course we had Twitter and we had a Facebook page. And suddenly people were talking about us here in the US. We heard of this TV show called Blood and Chrome, and suddenly they were actually making a note about us. We were like, hey, people just know that we exist. But things started to get increased. Suddenly, a lot of pages were writing about us, and we were like, okay, what if the IP people contact us? What do we do then? But they were really happy. They are really pleased that we did this fan production, because did we get paid for it? Yeah, by love from all the participants and of the Battlestar Galactica fans worldwide.
We did have a little bit of economic recompense, because yes, the days we took out of our day jobs and so on, which is also very, very unusual. We wanted to make this a pro production, easy to approach for newbies, and sustainable for the organizers. Not at all enough economic compensation at all, but it was a big thing even taking money for making a game at all, because that is seen as something you don't do. But I think it's necessary to continuous practice, and that won't be a problem here in the US, I think.
And also, normally when we do a LARP back home in Sweden, the local newspapers are writing about us, but here we had the national papers writing about us. The Metro was actually posting on their front page, me wearing duty blues. And afterwards, there were a lot of people blogging about and tweeting about the project. And at one of the after parties, we were standing there a bit after some glass of wine. Some of the American guys said, hey, we would like to do this in the US. Are you coming? Sure, I will be doing that. And I was like, hey, what we do then? So we were actually going to Galacticon. And after Galacticon, we came here to NYU in May, thanks to Shoshana. And after that, it started just to increase. And at Galacticon, we met some amazing people. We bummed the smoke from Michael Hogan.
Yeah. And talked to him about his specific part in the Monitor Celestra. And he's like, yeah, could I do a voiceover for that? That would be super cool.
And the last thing he said to
and he was also the last guy standing at every single party.
Yeah.
I can tell that. 5 o'clock. Yeah,
and there you see Adama himself watching the movie we showed you before with his assistant. And also we had a great opportunity taking a group picture with him. So there you have right now the American crew that are trying to bring Celestra here into the US. So they are one of these guys have worked at Bethesda doing the werewolf
stuff for Skyrim.
Yeah, for Skyrim. So yeah, Shane Lee Sang.
Yep. And I mean, it's worth noting that it's a completely player-driven initiative. We did not decide to make this in the US. It's just players who want to do it. And since we sort of got 50% of vision with Monitor Celestra, to be honest. So we see this as a chance to complete the design and actually run it in a place where it can be appreciated in a different way, because I think a lot of these issues are close to home here as well.
And after we being here in May, we had The Verge writing an article about us, and suddenly more and more articles. So I have counted, love statistics, and 150,000 Facebook likes nowadays. And that is just only people liking the articles, liking our page and stuff like that. So, yeah, we are crazy enough to actually doing this production again. And right now we're talking to some of the participants in Europe, and hopefully we'll do a production in Germany and one in Spain. So we had to bring Celestra in the US. We have, of course, the liability challenges. We have a new crowd, a new culture. And also we have a location. We're right now looking like 8 or 9 different locations, and we are.
If anybody knows anything about decommissioned naval vessels from
we need your help
between 1960 and 1995, please.
But also we know that we have really passionate fans over here. We know that we can do fan finance events.
Yeah, that's being done all the time here. I mean, that's a part of the culture.
There are a lot of people making props over here and doing costumes. We have official possibilities because there's this producer guy who did the show who was giving a thumbs up. But he says, like, I don't own this production anymore, but you have my blessing.
Yeah. And I think I went to Dragon Con. I mean, there's amazing costumes everywhere. People are spectacular. But the only moment they are in character is like the split second when they are posing for the camera. And they are expressing their love for these franchises. But every single time you start to talk to them about things like this, it's like, that's what we want to do. We want to enter our worlds. We want to recreate our fictional love affairs with these series and live them. And to me, it makes no sense that it hasn't been a thing. Possibly because of LARP having a bad name and so on. But I think that a perfect way of introducing these kinds of mainstream-ish Nordic LARPs is by making them fan events in known universes. It should be noted also that Disney did a patent for using live-action role-playing in theme parks 2 months after they acquired the rights to Star Wars. Just saying. So you can
They were
look
actually
at
also
that
visiting
pattern.
us. They had 3 people actually playing.
They had a
game
spy group of Imagineers coming over for Celestra as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and of course we had some success with the project and some failures. One of the biggest reasons for the success is of course the universe, that people knows about it.
Yeah.
We had a lot of visual stuff that people could see. Of course, the destroyer and the consoles, so people actually could run the spaceship. We did a crowdfunding, and we tried to really be online all time and just telling what we're doing, when we're doing it, and we tried to do it all inclusive. No pay and play, don't use it, it's pay and pray. But try at least to, if you're doing a LARP, try to give the participants as many easy ways to get their stuff. And if you have a costume, like when you're doing a universe like that, tell them where to buy it, or you need to increase the ticket so they actually get the proper costumes. And also we had some failures, of course.
Yeah, we're doing something that is very, very off the wall, which is combining sort of art house and mainstream, which means that nobody's going to get satisfied. And also, for fans, it is impossible to create the Viper. I'm sorry, Viper pilots, we cannot do that. So, I mean, there are some things that need to be left to simulation, but people are dreaming and expecting everything, so you can never deliver on fan dreams. But if there's a Swedish saying, and it's probably exists in the US as well, if you aim for the stars, you're going to end up in the treetops, at least. And because we chose to do so fucking much, it's just terrible amount of work, and you cannot, and we did not finish everything on time. It's simply like, nope, this needs to go, this needs to go. But of course, no player knows what the plan is initially, so they will not miss it. But still, it's a hole in our hearts. And you need to iterate better than we did. We should have done a test game for this, because it's so complex and so many systems, so much can frack up. Because in the first game, there were tech failures, there were food delivery failures, there were failures of workshops not being held, and so on and so forth. So practice run or price reduced first event, I think, is the way to go. So that's a massive lesson for us. These complex stuff needs to be iterated. But we had 3 games, so we could step it up every game. And make slightly different takes on the BSD universe as well.
And also, we wanted to show you how many people actually were involved in this project. So we're just going to do a slide with all the people. So it's a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, some more people. Yeah, there was a lot. Brett's Feminine is Storytelling Society. It's a non-profit organization I'm running in Sweden. So all the names you see here is the people actually work during the game to service the game masters, delivering food, trying to make me sleep, or giving me a coffee or a smoke or something, so I can relax. So that's what you need when you're doing a crazy production like this.
Yeah. So this crew, you could easily pull it off. I mean, you just need to talk to each other. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to us, and hope to see you here fairly soon with more news about location and so on. It's been a pleasure having you as an audience. So say we all.
All right, we have a bit for questions. Yeah. I have to say, there's a lot of things that those of us who work in digital games should be very jealous of. First, the graphics. Come on, sound. Can you top that? Second, dealing with political issues, social issues. I wish that digital games did that more often. And third, this is my little question before we open it up. In the video and the photos, we saw people, there seemed to be like a gender balance. I saw this middle-aged woman, and I'm like, what are those players? How did you reach out to those players? Again, another lesson for digital games. So how do you reach out to that variety of players?
That's the nature of the Nordic LARP scene right now. I think the biggest thematic issues during the last 5 years has been being queer and gender theory has been the inspiration for a lot of games. There's been like an Left Hand of Darkness, Ursula K. Le Guin inspired game, among other things. So it has been an active issue, and it has been talked about all the time, and that pulls in wonderful people. So we have a very, gender and sexual orientation-wise, we have a very, very diverse scene. Sadly, we don't have as ethnically diverse scene, this is still a middle-class white hobby, which I'm ashamed of. I think that should be the next issue to address for Nordic LARPdom, is finding that kind of balance as well. But it's just how it is, and it's happened the last 10 years, and it's like suddenly there's more women than guys in a lot of these games. The art house scene is 60% women and 40 men. So, yeah.
And also, a very fun thing that actually we had about 40% of first-time players, and there was a lot of players that just went for the Galactic because it was Galactica. And I met 2 weeks ago at the Scenario Festival in Stockholm. I met 2 of the people, and one of the guys was age 46 as a first-time player. So it's really fun that people actually found the hobby.
Cool. Okay, questions. Wow. That's
So I like the note you guys made that this game had stuff for players who wanted to play kind of rules-based versus players who wanted to strictly play narrative-based. And as a player, I don't know how I would choose.
You don't need to choose before. You can actually change it during the game. If you're working the CIC and you feel like this is not fun anymore, so just walk to the other end of the ship and start playing with them. And let's abandon your post and do a thing of them.
Play you having a mental breakdown or discovering the Lords of Cobol, or I mean that arc is in your hands. You can shift. And also, of course, there are times of high intensity in the simulation game and high intensity in the dramatic game. Like when there is a silent attack, even the fully immersionist players, nobody's going not to care that there is an attack, because that's also a part of the expression. So they will suddenly become very engaged in the simulation. These hardcore drama people will take it super seriously because it is happening, and it is happening there for their character. So, and especially when you're doing things that doesn't feel like simulations, because you're actually doing real calculus. So it does feel like you're doing it for real. You're using the same methods that we used during the Second World War to navigate and shoot torpedoes. So it does feel very natural. Even when you're in full simulation mode, you can go very, very emotionally deep into that as well. So, and that was our attempt. Sometimes it didn't work, of course. We're trying to strike the balance between them, but it's mad.
Yes, of course we have, and we have this culture that who wants the LARP afterwards. But as long as you are having fun and you feel like you have experienced something new, then you have won the LARP for yourself. Because the LARPing is more like 80% of your own experience, and just trying to give other people good scenes and a fun environment to play in. We're just trying to giving people a sandbox of very many crazy fun tools, and then it's up to the players.
But yeah, of course, there were moments where sort of there's a borderline breakdown between, no, we want to run the ship, and we just want to get this right. We have, like, we can shoot this base star down if we just cooperate, and you're now freaking out and like playing your, I miss my mother in the middle of the CIC. Of course, people become upset for reals. I mean, it's but that is perfectly okay, because it's within the boundaries of the fiction. As long as that hate and that conflict and that clash is framed diegetically, like within the fiction, it is fully okay, because we want people to scream at each other. We want people to be super upset with each other. And then afterwards, it's like, you fucker, and then hug. I mean, that's what we want.
We have an expression called bleed. It's when your character is coming more a part of yourself. I was at the LARP only a month ago, and I was playing at it was a LARP where we were 10 couples going to a paratherapy weekend, and I was playing this character who was really social in my beliefs, and I didn't like gay people at all, and I have a lot of gay friends, and I was going to IKEA on Monday and saw a gay couple kiss. I was like, and then I realized it was still my character. It was not me who reacted, and a lot of people in Nordic scene are trying to search for that, what we call bleed, and a really important thing is to have workshops afterwards and just talk about the LARP, because we are not sitting at computer screen and just turn it off, because it's your feelings, it's your reaction that you actually are playing, and that is the fine and amazing thing we're doing a LARP, actually. at least this is for me.
I mean, there's a whole lecture to be had on Bleed, and that's either Johanna Koljonen or Bjarke Petersen that should do that lecture. They're super experts on Bleed. Yes, more questions?
Yes. Something very off-putting about a lot of American LARPs for new players is that you kind of have to, like, when you're a new player, you dedicate a lot of time to very fledgling tasks. Like, I'm going to sit and learn to bake bread, and it's very off-putting for new players. Is that also something that happens in the Nordic scene, or less so?
Yeah, of course that happens, and it happens a lot of stuff like that in the fantasy genre. But I think, like Celestra, we try to take that away, and just like people could come 2 days before and just buy a ticket and get the costume and play. So, but of course that happens, and we had a lot of good internet communication on Facebook, on forums. We have an organization called Sverok back home that are actually trying to get people get together, and non-profit organizations for youth that are actually teaching each other on how to do LARPs. And it started in 1991. So we have a lot of books, and people are writing about stuff like that. So yeah, it happens a lot. But I think that's, for me, when I go to fantasy LARP, 95% is the prep before the LARP, and 5% is the LARP.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of love the idea of learning to bake bread in a medieval fashion. That's fucking awesome. But I'm a reenactor as well, so when I approach fantasy LARPs, I sometimes do approach them in sort of a reenactment fashion. But you're absolutely right. It is, I mean, requiring people to have those sort of skill sets if you want a broad audience is just not good. I mean, we even cut it down to you get your clothes at the door. So because that's sort of usually the minimum is that you create your costume and you show up. And we wanted to cut away even that, because that throws so many people are just simply don't have the skills to sit down with a sewing machine and make a costume, and it's going to look like shit anyway if they do it. So this was sort of our way out of that. It's more expensive, it's more taxing for the organizers, but it is more open and inviting, I think.
So you talked a little bit about like some of the production issues with bringing an event like this into the United States. I was wondering, if, like with insurance and things like that. I was wondering if there were maybe like sort of the culture of players or like preconceptions people bring that are maybe different from your side and from the player's side that you've encountered as you've worked on things.
Yeah, one of the things we're actually discussing is trying to have a culture thing that we're trying to bring as many Nordic LARPers to the games here in the US, doing the workshops. And because we have a lot of time still, we are trying to put this off in 2015, 2016.
Could you briefly just talk about like what you mean by workshop?
It's just, you can do a thing in your
Yeah, I mean, workshops form, Personally, I'm like go-in raw player, but I see the virtual workshops, and we skimped on a lot of workshops from Monitor Celestra too, and that is one of the biggest critiques we've gotten. Workshops are used to sort of bring everybody into a collective culture of play. So you would have trust exercises, like traditional falling exercises, improvisational acting exercises. It's basically making a fool out of each other together, so you feel that security and that you sort of, I've already done the worst, so I feel liberated to play with these people and know them a little bit more. So whatever exercises you're using, often you use the framework of the game that you're going to run, but the point of it is really to forge a common gaming culture in your group, and I think that's going to be vital here. I've been living here for 5 months now, so I don't know that much about the US LARP scene. Of course, we have preconceived ideas about the US LARP scenes, like nobody's business. I mean, we're super snobby about that, and I think that's wrong, because I do enjoy my like crazy buffer fests, and I love like interactive literature mysteries and like tightly written ones of those, and the work that the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society is doing is awesome, and so on and so on. But there's a essay, I can't remember the name of the person who wrote it. It's called Dungeons and Dragons is the American Dream. And that one has a really, really interesting observation point. And that is the reluctance of US players to just play with what they have. It's like, I'm going to play a ranger, so I better be pretty fit to do that, because I need to run in the forest a lot. Instead, US LARPs are using simulation systems to even out the balance, to say that everybody enters on the same level. And then it's up to you to grow and level up. And when you think about it, that's an image of the world that, and I'm going to generalize like nobody's business here, but there's like, it's an American image of the world that everybody starts on the same level and it's you that climb. And coming from a mitigated socialist country, we know that that's not true. We have class, we have the ethnicity, we never enter at the same level. But this cultural myth is being reproduced in the level system, where everybody starts one and pop, 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 pop. And it's the same thing with LARPs. They try to make everybody an even playing field. Whereas, because it's about winning and it's about getting to the top. For us, it's not. It's about reveling in the injustice of it all. I mean, there's absolutely no justice in a Nordic LARP. Some people play the king, other people play the toilet cleaners.
And that's the fun part with the Nordic LARP. And also, we are thinking of doing 2 different versions over here. We're doing a LARP version and an event version. At the event version, we will use the LARPers to like create an immersive experience that you can come and watch and be a part of it, and you don't need to be the guys who are doing the CIC stuff and like that. So it's a lot of in discussion right now.
Yeah, maybe like a genre version of Sleep No More. I mean, that's the closest analogy we can make to that idea.
You mentioned some of the rules that you kind of revealed throughout the episodes or kind of played out throughout the episodes. I was wondering how else you manage kind of chaos or other player behavior that might have broken down the world or the game.
I think that the people are actually taking care of it by themselves. The players, you know that the players there are so responsible for their own gaming, and most of us we started playing when we were like 13, 14, and now we just want to have a good experience. If someone go over a boundary, then they talk to each other. So there hasn't been any time during this production that I as a producer need to step in and tell someone you need to step down your play.
But yes, there's times that we want to sort of twist the plot a little bit in one direction or say, like, whoa, they're going on a strange tangent. But it's almost impossible to know when that is happening. We had the phantoms, the red-clad people, to sort of inform us of that, because video surveillance is going to give you jack shit. And like listening to people's conversations is going to give you jack shit. You need to be in the room to feel what's going on in the room. And by using that data, we sent in an NPC character, for instance, to say, okay, we need more focus on the political administration. They have nothing to do, and you're sitting there and nobody's listening to them. Okay, let's send in a Roslyn representative that's gives them the proper respect. Okay, let's do that. So those little things you can do, but that is also very, very rare. This is the runtime game mastering attitude, which is again the part of the mad more is more thing. Usually in these kinds of games, you just let it go and let it run. Also, episode structure. That means that players will self-police, and they will between the act and say like, nope, our relationship is not going anywhere. Like, we need to break up this. Like, we can't play this love affair. It just doesn't work. There's no sparks. Nothing works. Let's have a horrible row within the first 5 minutes, and we go each other different ways and do things we're more interested in doing. So these kinds of things are done constantly. We call it sort of like collective directing. It's a collective game mastering. Yeah.
And also, if you look at my game, No Man's Land, we had decided some of the scenes that, like with the airplane, we had a time for it, and we have the people, 7 people just put out in the field, and you say like, okay, you act like this, you and them like that. But we can see, we didn't know before how people should react. And that's a normal thing when you're doing a big fantasy game or a post-apocalyptic game, that you're just deciding a couple of scenes that will happen around, like this will happen at lunch tomorrow, and we're putting this character in at 6 in the evening. So we're just trying to give people more stuff to play with.
I would say there's one conference called Knutpunkt where designers and players meet, and there's a lot of practical workshop stuff being done there and developing techniques. But there's not like every Tuesday we have a general LARP skill workshop. That does not exist because organizers are sometimes a bit, they want to do their thing in their way. So there are like different workshop methods or slightly different approaches, and they're custom made for specific games. So what you're saying would be a great benefit to the scene. There's always talks, and there's sometimes
I don't agree.
Yeah, no, I mean there is constant work, but and maybe now it's starting to change. But
yeah, it has started to change. But also, I think that LARP production, you need to. Each production is so unique, so you need to choose your workshop techniques for that LARP. And we have a lot of conferences in the Nordic countries. We have, of course, Knutpunkt, we have Prolog, we have Forum in Denmark. So a lot of things is going on, and people have more talks about how can we do a workshop and teaching each other to do a workshop, because you want your workshop to be specialized for your LARP. Actually, I haven't been to just a LARP workshop for just LARP techniques. What you can use that we use different kind of techniques for playing. Like if I want to play a sexual relationship with Martin at the LARP, we look at what are the organizers deciding for techniques to use, and people are actually using each other's techniques now. Like 5-6 years ago, they were more like, I want to invent my own technique, but now we are actually borrowing stuff from each other and we're rerunning games. That's the new thing in Sweden and Denmark and Oslo right now. We're just trying to. Yeah, we're doing a lot of more reruns with the games.
But to talk about a little bit, Keith Johnston was sort of a methodology guru in the Nordic live-action role-playing scene in the beginning of the 2000s. I mean, then he was the shit. And the yes but or yes and. I mean, that is sort of, it's commonly accepted now. But he was studied quite a lot. I mean, Stanislavski has also been studied. I think, to me, Stanislavski works better. I'm more that kind of guy. No, not yet. We need to talk. Please send me, because I did theater studies for the only reason to mine the shit out of theater history for techniques to use in LARP. But of course there are so many. So I mean, anybody who has sort of like, you guys should look at this, you probably think it's interesting. Just hit us up, because we love being able to use things because every single cultural expression can and should enrich live action role playing as a form.
Yeah. Right. And games in general. Saying.
Yes, games in general as well, of course. This is just one outlier form of games, so yeah.
All right, well, you're going to stick around, yes? Yep. So if you have more questions for them, please come down. We have lunch, yes? A round of applause, yes.